time to allow for people to actually find the room. Some people have been directed to the basement, and as soon as we have a critical mass of speakers in the audience, we'll get started. All right? Some of the speakers actually made it with stuck taxis and the adventures of the subway. And we also have recognized some people in the audience. So what I'm proposing to do with this roundtable is that I'm going to try to start us off with an introductory presentation. My perspective on this, I volunteer as a beekeeping representative on the board of directors of the German Beekeeping Association, Professional Beekeepers Association. I serve as the president of the European Professional Beekeepers Association, and I'm also the coordinator of the Apimondia working group on GMOs and the impact on the beekeeping sector. When I started my volunteer work, I was recruited by my fellow beekeepers to the board of the German Professional Beekeepers Association. That was about 10 years ago, and that was just happened to be the time where GMOs were supposed to be introduced in Europe. So since I was the new member on the board and this was the new problem, my colleagues said, Walter, this is your problem, you work on this. So the last 10 years I had the pleasure of going through the ups and downs of this issue, which is extremely contentious, especially in Europe. And was in charge of this issue also at the European Professional Beekeepers Association before I became president. And when I was asked by Gilles Razzia to be the coordinator of this Apimondia working group on GMOs, I tried my best not to look at this just from the German or European perspective, but also understand the perspectives of beekeepers and the honey sector in other countries. I was at Apimondia in Argentina, which I think was a very interesting opportunity to exchange views on the subject. And I was invited to the beekeeping conference in Chile. I've got a little bit of the South American perspective in the back of my mind, but luckily, this is Apimondia, so pretty much all parts of the world, except for Antarctica maybe, are here to present their own view. So with my introductory presentation, you will see that it is heavily influenced by my experience coming from Europe. I'm going to try to reflect a little bit on what I understand the other points of view are. After that, we're going to have the pleasure of hearing from the government side. Mr. Wolfgang Köhler, I'm going to introduce him afterwards, is the former head of the GMO unit of the German Ministry of Agriculture and also the former chairman of the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety. and he has at least as many years experience with this issue. From the government perspective, how do I deal with these impacts and the different stakeholders? So this is going to be very interesting. And also, not in the program, but very valuable addition to our list of speakers is going to be Gudrun Beck, who's going to explain to us how from a honey analysis perspective, we're currently able to detect the impact of this issue in the honey itself. And from there, I would like to go to the different countries' perspective, different part of the world, how they see themselves impacted and what the issues are. The overall goal of this is to have a common understanding and maybe come up with common approaches to this problem. We're all beekeepers and we all produce a very valuable product, regardless of whether we're producing it for domestic consumption or for export. So with this, I would like to go to the presentation. Am I supposed to see something on this monitor? Okay, sometimes, all right, okay. So, as part of my work in the coordinating this working group, interacting with beekeepers and beekeeping representatives in different parts of the world, and I asked them for input for my presentation and maybe contribute some slides. And I think a very good overview slide was provided by Juan Zebarras from Chile. He basically said, we as beekeepers are the ham in the sandwich. We're basically sandwiched in with, on the one hand, the GMO industry trying to get their products into cultivation, and on the other side, all kinds of groups in civil society that, for whatever reason, are rejecting. And I think this is an excellent slide because in this position that we're in as beekeepers, it actually doesn't matter what we as beekeepers think about GMOs, whether we're in favor or against. What's important is, are we producing in a country where the GMO industry has succeeded in getting these plants into cultivation? And on the other hand, are we trying to market our product in a region where the opposition is very strong and looks, therefore, at our product in a different way? So that's the view from Chile. How are we getting into this ham in the sandwich situation? Beekeeping is a part of agriculture, but you know, there are a lot of areas in agriculture and food production that are a closed system where, as a producer, I have quite a bit of control of you know, what I feed my chickens in the barn, or when I'm raising pigs, where I'm buying my animal feed. As a beekeeper, we're setting the bees free. You can see my bees here in Upper Bavaria, and as you can see in this picture, my bees pay absolutely no attention to the fence here. Okay? So you cannot tell the bees don't go in this area or go in the other area. It's an open system, and when you look at a farming landscape, this is also in Upper Bavaria, and you look at just the minimum foraging range of honeybees, there are many fields of farmers in the foraging range of our bees, and what our product looks like depends also on the choices that these farmers make, what they choose to cultivate. And one of the choices that farmers make in some parts of the world is that they cultivate GMOs. So if in the foraging areas of our bees you have GMO cultivation, with the open system that we have, you have the potential of GMO material in the honey. And this can be pollen, of course. That's something that a lot of the discussion revolves around. But if the genetically modified plant is a nectar-producing plant like canola or cotton, for example, then also part of the nectar will be from a genetically modified plant. And in some parts of the world, beekeepers, of course, in many parts of the world, beekeepers, for example, for the winter, or to push colonies to be ready for pollination service, beekeepers also feed bees, and not only potentially, but also we've seen this in reality. If whatever you're feeding your bees, you're getting from genetically modified plants, then this will also be reflected in the honey. So we have seen genetically modified soy in honey, where you don't have the pollen, but just the DNA, because genetically modified soy meal was used as a pollen substitute. So it's not just, the impact is not just from the fact that our beekeeping system is an open system, but also in some areas where the beekeeper has control, we can produce the impact ourselves. So the impact is very complex. And when you're trying to assess the impact of GMOs, it's actually in a lot of cases not helpful to make general statements. All GMOs have the following effect. Because with genetic modification, there are all kinds of modifications you can do, and depending on that modification, and also on the farming system that this modification enables, you have different impacts. So one example that we're not going to cover in this workshop, but I want to mention it as one of the impacts. If, for example, the plant is genetically modified to produce its own insecticide, and the insecticide turns out to have either a direct effect or a synergetic effect, then you have an impact on bee health, and that of course has an economic impact, because you need healthy bees to have a viable beekeeping operation. So a certain percentage of GM plants in the world actually produce their own insecticide, and at least in Europe there is a regulatory loophole, because the insecticide that is being produced by genetically modified plants is not subject to the same rules and regulations as insecticides that you spray or use as a seed treatment. This is actually a loophole that we're trying to close. But you also have, and that's actually the majority of the plants that are currently in use, you have genetically modified plants that do not produce an insecticide, but they're modified so that they tolerate a broad spectrum herbicide. And herbicides are not, bees are not in the direct path when it comes to herbicides, but the use of herbicides that is enabled with these plants, of course, changes the agricultural landscape and changes the foraging opportunities. So this is not exactly what we as beekeepers are looking for when we're looking for foraging opportunities of our bees. And at Apimondia 2009, Lucas Martinez gave several presentations on the impact of GMOs in Argentina and basically the displacement of the beekeeping community being pushed out of traditional production areas by GM-enabled soy cultivation. This is something in the European debate about GMO regulation. A process happened where the impacts were assessed initially very narrowly, looking at what is the genetic modification, what substances does this plant chemically produce, and the farming system that was enabled by this, the farming system that the plant was designed for, was initially not looked at, but increasingly, as they see, for example, the dramatic increase in glyphosate use with the use of Roundup-ready plants, at least in the European community, the regulators are saying it doesn't make sense to take this very narrow view of GMOs. We have to use the overall system as our point of reference. The cultivation of GMO crops complicates the relationship between farmers and beekeepers. So in an area where you have no GMO cultivation, it's very common that, number one, farmers invite or even contract beekeepers to come in for pollination, or in traditional farming areas in Europe, it's very common that beekeepers get a place to set up their bees on a local farm, whether that farm needs pollination or not, and in exchange the farmer's family gets some honey every year, kind of as rent for this place, and it's a traditionally even most farms had beekeeping activities on the farm itself. Now, if you introduce GMOs, now you have the question of contamination. So, do I even want to be near this farm? What happens to my product? Can I still market it? What happens to the image of the product? But it also complicates the relationship, because if a farmer allows a beekeeper with his bees on his farm, he may actually increase the amount of contamination between farmers due to the pollination activity of the bees. Depending on the attitude of consumers in your target market, GMO contamination can make it all but impossible to market bee products in certain markets. This can happen because the honey no longer meets regulatory requirements. For example, if it contains an event that doesn't have food approval in the EU. This can happen because a retailer, a supermarket chain, has instituted their own standards on whether the products are GMO-free or not. But it can also happen when you are a beekeeper that is heavily focused on regional direct marketing. Because if you are in a region where GMO cultivation is a contentious issue, and the local newspaper says, oh, we have the first GMO cultivation in our region, and you're at the farmer's market saying, hey, this is great honey from this region, you're going to have a whole bunch of direct questions from consumers. What about your honey? And these questions are not being stopped by labeling rules. We have the situation in several regions in Germany. You also have a whole bunch of new issues on the supply chain. Because now the whole food industry, as soon as you have GMO cultivation, if you are in a region that regulates GMOs and the labeling of food products, you have the whole chain from the producer to the consumer dealing with analysis, with certificates of GMO status, and it further complicates the issue. I keep referring to Europe because in terms of GMO regulation, this is probably the most regulated part of the world right now. But on the other hand, it's also a big market for honey exports, so everybody wants to sell to Europe. And if you want to sell to Europe, you have to understand the mindset of the consumer that you are trying to sell to, whether directly or indirectly. And so, for example, if you're in South America and you're dealing with a European buyer, that buyer has to be aware of the attitudes of the consumer. And the attitudes of the consumer towards GMOs in Europe have been studied by the European Commission. There have been several reports like that. I don't want to bore you with the details, but GM food has a pretty bad image in Europe. The image is actually so bad that for most of the time I was involved with this issue representing the beekeepers, there was a gentleman, Dr. Thierfelder, who was the lobbyist from Monsanto, and his job was it to convince European consumers that these products are safe. And of course, he tried his very best, but in 2011, he was actually fired by Monsanto because he was unable to convince the European consumers, and he was not replaced. So Monsanto has essentially given up on convincing the consumers this is safe. Similar situation with BASF. Last year they made an announcement that they are going to pull out of Europe in terms of research activities for GMOs. And what they said in their press release is there's still a lack of acceptance for this technology in many parts of Europe from the majority of consumers, farmers, and politicians. So that's why it doesn't make business sense to continue the research activities for the European market. Okay? So in this environment, even if multinational corporations with their PR budgets and their experts cannot convince the consumer, you cannot expect that the beekeeping community can now convince these consumers that products containing GMOs are safe, regardless, even if we wanted to. Okay? You can also see that the number of GMO-free regions in Europe are rising. So you have a patchwork of GMO-free regions in some parts based on government level decisions to be GMO-free, and in some parts voluntary efforts by civil society where basically farmers in the region agreed with consumers and everybody else that they're not going to cultivate. But this issue of rejection by the consumer is not limited to the EU. For example, you had last year, I think it was last year or earlier this year, you had a ballot measure in California, where consumers were demanding the right to know. The NGOs trying to push this ballot measure spent close to $9 million to promote it. Industry got together and spent $45 million trying to defeat it, and they managed to get the support from over 70% for this measure down to a point where the measure was defeated. But it shows that the discussion on whether we should eat these products, but at least the consumers have a right to know whether there's GMO content in there or not, is not limited to Europe. What is also important when assessing the impact is that honeybees are not just another non-target species. At least in Europe, the GMO regulation requires to do an environmental impact assessment, and you're looking at whatever non-target species you find interesting, like butterflies or something. But I think because of the importance of honeybees and pollination, and also because of the economic importance, both to the farming sector and the beekeeping sector, you cannot treat honeybees as just another non-target species. One of the problems that has, at least in Europe, really angered a lot of people when GMOs were introduced is that the polluter pays principle was turned on its head. So the polluter pays principle would basically mean if you use a certain technology and it ends up impacting other people, then you as user of the technology should be responsible for absorbing these costs. But because of the political power of these companies, when laws were actually made also in Europe implementing GMO regulation, the whole all the cost of finding out through analysis, have I been impacted by this product, ends up on the non-user side. So there's always an arguments, okay, GMOs are great because GMO technology makes products cheaper. But when you actually look at what is happening throughout the whole supply chain is that GMO technology makes non-GM products more expensive because the non-GM side has all the costs of doing the analysis and keeping the food chain separate. The economic impact is not limited to the beekeepers, but there's also an economic impact on the farmers that contract with beekeepers for pollination. So if the beekeeper is worried about contamination in the product, he may not want to come to your farm to do the pollination at all. Or we have an example, at least from Chile, I don't know how pervasive this is, where he says, okay, I will come and pollinate your crops, but because I cannot make as much money marketing my honey right now from this pollination job, I'm going to charge you more for the pollination. We had some court cases in Germany where basically beekeepers were trying to defend themselves from essentially being driven off of their traditional production areas, because if you end up being in the wrong spot as the ham in the sandwich, this can really impact the livelihood and the profitability of your beekeeping operations. What is also heavily impacted is fair trade honey production, because this is happening in some countries where there's very little protection from the government in terms of GMO regulation. You're also dealing with small producers with small quantities, and of course, if you have to do honey analysis on a small quantity of honey, it will increase the price of that honey disproportionately compared to other producers that are analyzing much larger batches. So if you look at all of these impacts, we can say that if a government allows GMO cultivation, they basically have a responsibility to the stakeholders to regulate this cultivation in such a way that you do not, or at least minimize the negative impacts on stakeholders, especially the beekeeping community. And certainly, if a government right now is making a decision, are we going to permit GMO cultivation in our country or not, it is important that they are aware of the impacts on the beekeeping sector. About a year ago, I was contacted by beekeepers in a Central American country, where the government was in the process of deciding on whether to lift a GMO cultivation ban. So basically, I tried to supply them with all the points that the government should think about prior to allowing the cultivation, so that especially the impact on the beekeeping sector, on the possibility of honey exports is taken into account when you're weighing the pros and cons in this decision. And but there are also positive impacts. For example, this issue has brought beekeepers around the world closer together in working together constructively, trying to minimize the impact on the sector. And some of the solutions that we have been aware of from the discussion in Europe, we also discussed with in a modified, in an adapted way with beekeepers in other countries. For example, when you look at Chile, Chile is actually producing GMO seed and GMO-free seed. In order to do that, they actually have to have a very elaborate system of keeping those production areas separate. They also have a regulation that you cannot cultivate GMOs just for, as a regular farmer. You have to be part of the seed production system, because anybody that just produces outside of the system would break it. And so from the seed production side, there was already a system in place to keep track of where the cultivation is, so at least beekeepers and the honey sector there could figure out how to manage the logistics to at least produce some of the honey GMO-free, even though in the country you have GMO cultivation. There has also been an interesting socioeconomic impact in Europe, because the prospect of the introduction of GMOs has brought a lot of people that didn't really used to talk to each other together to try to solve this problem. So you basically had the whole civil society in different regions around Europe working together to organize these GMO-free regions. And what we found in Europe now is that after everybody learned to work together in these groups, now the same groups are getting involved in other questions of agricultural policy and are trying to solve them regionally. So this common problem has brought a lot of people together, and I think this will have a long-term positive effect on regional agricultural policy, at least in our region. And so thank you very much for your attention for these introductory remarks. And I would like to introduce to you now Mr. Wolfgang Köhler from the Federal Ministry of Agriculture in Germany, the former head of the GMO unit there, who had to spend many years trying to explain to me why the system that Germany had put in place implementing European law is right for the beekeepers. Please, a warm welcome for Wolfgang Köhler.
Thank you all. As announced, of course, I worked about 10 years on the GMO issue. It was a very interesting time. The view on genetically modified organisms all over the world is very differentiated. We have many countries where the population, the majority of the population, is not at all in front of that of GMOs, and because they are not sure that GMOs is good for them, nor for their health, nor for the environment. Of course, the industry does its best to persuade consumers, producers of the value of GMOs, but as far as I see, the discussion is not at all concluded, and it will go on all over the world, and the results, I'm not sure where it will come to an end. On the international level, we only have one regulation. It's the so-called Cartagena Protocol, which is part of the Convention on Biology Diversity. But this is only based on the question of biosafety. That means all member states which have joined this protocol, and it's about 160 or 170 countries all over the world, without the US, for instance. To be in line with this protocol, they have to have, let's say, at least a basic system for authorization of GMOs. But how this system has to work, there the protocol is not very clear, but it says you must have a risk assessment, and you have some sort of control if it works or not. So this is not a very strict system, and it is not very difficult for many countries to be in line with this. But what is excluded from this protocol are other issues, especially the issue with which we are dealing here, that is the issue of consumer's choice. And there we have very different systems all over the world. As a regulator, you normally have to look at what, to have different interests. You have the interest of the industry and you have the interests of your consumers. And of course, in all the countries, this system works in another way. We are quite lucky that in Europe we have a system which is based on the ideal that the consumer must have the choice if he wants to buy products made with GMOs or consisting of GMOs. But of course, not only the consumer, but the producer must have the same choice. The producer, that's the farmer, or as what we are speaking of here, the beekeeper. He is the producer of honey, and of course, he depends on the choice of the consumer, but he depends also from his own ideals of producing. And if he wants to produce the honey without, or which is not contaminated by GMOs, he must have the possibility. And the basic question, as I have learned of this regulation, the basic question is perhaps a rather simple one, but it's the question of labeling. If you don't have to label products containing or consisting of or produced from GMOs, of course, you will never have the choice, because the consumer does not see what he is buying, and so he can't choose, and so the producer, he has no, for him it's no question why he should stick to certain regulations, because if he uses GMOs or not, for the consumer, it's the same. So in my view, this is the crucial question on the beginning. And you see, for instance, in this process in the United States, how crucial even the industry, for how crucial the industry sees this question. That's Walter just told us. We had this big campaign in California, which in my view was a big success, even if they missed the majority for about, I think, 2%. They came to 48% of support, starting with 75. And we see the same process running now in the state of Washington, in the United States, where we have a big support of even about 80%. And we see the same processes going on. The industry is spending very big money on this to tell the people that in fact they should not know, they should not want to know, which in my view it's more or less ridiculous to tell the people what they should want to know or not. But I don't know if they will succeed. Even if the industry will succeed, I'm sure the next US state will make the same thing. And sooner or later, I'm almost sure that we will have in the United States a labeling system too. How it is, how it works, especially if it will be the same as in Europe or something other, that's not so important. But basic question is, if you have to label, if you give the choice to the consumer or not. And that is the starting point. Why the consumer should, it's not a question. Well, we don't have, as a regulator, we never questioned why the consumer wants to know it. There are different motivations, perhaps. There's perhaps the doubt if GMOs, the consumption of GMOs on the long run does not harm your health, yes or not. Of course, that's a question. This is still, researchers are still working on that. There are many people saying we had never approved that the consumption of GMOs will harm human health. On the other hand, we have certain hints, we have certain, let's say, indices that may happen. And in my view, in this situation, you must be on the safe side. It's a precautionary principle which should be the most important here in this situation. And that means that you don't have to prove that it does not harm. You have to prove that it does not harm. And if you cannot prove, of course, you must wait and to be on the safe side. Precautionary principle is at one hand. Then there are many people who see that the use of GMOs could harm the environment. We have these problems in Argentina and many other countries. Of course, these problems are not linked to the use of GMOs. Perhaps we have the big problems with the soy cultivation on big surface. We would have more or less the same if it would not be GM soy, but rather similar problems with non-GM soy. But the use of the GMOs just makes the system, this agro-industrial system, more easy for the farmer. And we call it the agro-industrial complex, which is working together, the agro-industrial way of production. And that is something which many people do not want. They see that it harms the environment, that it harms the products. These products are less healthy for the consumers, and as far as they are feed, they are less healthy for animals. And all these motivations together, they could be the basis for consumers to abstain from the consumption of GMOs or products made by GMOs. So how could regulation react on this? As I told you, we are rather lucky in Europe because we have a system of authorization which is, let's say, relatively strict. It is not the ideal, what we wanted to have, but you can tell in principle it works. Of course, everybody knows that these authorization systems they work, or they are based, the function is based on people who control. Not only how you control, but who is in charge of this control. And of course, if you have people there which are linked to I don't want to say they have interest in this, but of course they are linked to producers and to researchers, and they are in fact not so independent as they should be. So, of course, there are many we could do better, but in fact, principally, the system works. And what we have a rather strict regime of labeling, and that comes to the result that on the European market you would find no food made from GMOs, because it must be labeled, and if you put your labeled product in your shelf, the retailers, they never would sell it, so they don't. Retailers, they really fear the production of GMOs because they fear the reaction of the consumers. Though they are very sensible on this question, and so you can say that the food market in Europe is practically GMO-free, which is not at all the case for the feed market, because we have a certain lack in our legislation in Europe that you don't have to label animal food, that means meat, eggs and milk, even if the animals are fed with GMO, with GM maize, with GM soy and other products. This must not be labeled. There, you can label if you want, but of course nobody does. And many people in Europe, they feel that this is really a lack in the system. So, and there is no chance to change, because the political system on the European level, there is so, let's say, it doesn't move. It is so, it's a so big question that you will never have a majority in the one or in the other hand. So the European Commission will never try to change this regulation. So what we can do, and what we did in Germany, we went the other way around and created a certain labeling where you can see, where you can promise to the consumer that this product is produced really GMO-free. And this is a labeling system on the other way around. Of course, it is not the ideal, what we wanted to have, but it works, and it works from year to year, it works better, and many producers see the advantage that they have. Of course, the production is more expensive because you must have a control regime for all your products you put in the production process, but on the other hand, you can sell your products labeled without GMOs. You can sell them on a higher price. And this is one solution where the regulation could react. The other solution is to create GMO-free regions. Of course, that would be the ideal, because if you want to sell products as GMO-free, you must have a rather expensive control system. As if you are sure that these products come from a region which is officially declared GMO-free, then you don't need to have a really control system, and then that will be the most, let's say, effective way. So we have a system, we have the possibility in Europe to declare regions GMO-free, but it's more or less on a voluntary way. And we are working on this to change this. The European community, there are many member states trying to change the regulation to make this system more strict and more reliable. But I don't see where it will come and how many years it will take to come to a result on this. For the honey producers, of course, the best for them, the most easiest way would be if there would be no labeling, so they would be free to do what they want. But as far as I have learned, of course, that would be very easy, but they are sure that they want to have a product which is coming from the nature and which is pure and safe and healthy. And of course, with all the impacts of GMOs, you can't be sure. You can't, let's say on the other way around, I can understand that the beekeepers do not want to sell their honey if they are not sure that this honey is not contaminated. And that's, on the one hand, it's obviously their desire to do this, and on the other hand, of course, they react on the demand of the consumer. For the consumer, honey is another thing than, let's say, a fruit or something like that. It has the reputation really to be a pure and healthy product. And if we will stick to this, and if we will fulfill these demands and expectations, we must see that they give to the honey producers the opportunity to produce their honey without any influence of GMOs. And of course, in many countries, it will be a little bit difficult to do this, but I think there are systems and possibilities to stick to this, to fulfill these demands, even in these countries where you don't have, not yet perhaps, registers of cultivation or systems of labeling. But in the future, as far as I see, following the demands from Europe and in the future in other countries, I think this will be a development even in the US and even in South America. I stop for the moment and let's see with the discussion.
Thank you very much. Governments or regulators' perspective. We have a question from the audience.
Россия.
Can you step up to the microphone, or do we have a microphone? We're going to do questions about just understanding the remarks, and we'll have a full discussion after the speakers. So please, if you have a question specifically to the...
Да. Значит, Россия, Масленникова, Академия ветеринарной медицины и биотехнологии. В 2010 году в Москве был проведен международный конгресс по диагностике, по диагностике болезней, как ветеринарии, и так и человека. И в частности, на конгрессе было сказано, что в Европе существует совершенно официальное разрешение применения геномодифицированных продуктов, например, даже в детском питании, допуск 1 грамм на килограмм. Вы говорите, что у вас нет, значит, все продукты, которые выпускаются, не геномодифицированы. Как это будет? Спасибо.
If I understand the question correctly, there is a, you think there is a permissible threshold for baby food. I think what Wolfgang Köhler explained is that even if legally you can place the product on the market because it has food authorization, the fact that you have to label it starting at 0.9% by species means that no consumers buys it, okay? So we actually never get to the question of what is the maximum permissible level, okay? Because already the level that triggers labeling causes it not to be placed on the market because the retailers know that the consumers won't buy it. Does that make sense? Okay?
Perhaps one remark. If you have the authorization to place a product on the market in Europe, a genetically modified organism, there is no threshold at all. That will mean, let's say, that's in theory. They say if it's authorized, there will be no harm for human health. And then you can eat it as much as you want. There is no threshold in quantity. Of course, the thresholds will react for the labeling, but not for the question if it could harm your health or not. So, if you use it in food for children, for babies, for instance, if it's authorized, you can use it, but you must label it. So, in fact, I don't think that there is any baby food in Europe with made from GMOs, because normally you must label it.
Это
So
говорилось
nobody will
на
harm.
Конгрессе. Вот то, о чем я говорю, было официально заявлено на Конгрессе. Я ничего не выдумываю, я просто присутствовала на это. И поэтому вот эта разница, может быть, перевод был неточный, но разница вот эта, что вы говорите, что недопустимо, значит, я на другом Конгрессе слышала, что это допустимо даже в детском питании 1 грамм на килограмм. Понимаете? Спасибо.
Иван Гудков, Россия. Мы все понимаем, что пчеловод профессионал, он стоит перед дилеммой. Он может выжить, только продавая свои продукты пчеловодства. За остальное он никогда не заработает себе на жизнь. Вот. И мне хотелось бы вот понять одну такую вещь, что мы смотрим с антропоцентристских позиций. Как выручить экономику человеческую? Но вот в докладах наших, господин Хофекер и второй доклад, значит, я не слышал, кто бы защитил пчелу вообще. Вот. Потому что основная проблема для пчелы — это не то, что там делают эти двуногие животные. Вот. Кто в очках, кто без очков, в общем, мрут они от той еды, которую они кушают, или не мрут. Их основная проблема в другом совершенно. Что никто не спросил пчел, почему, какие ГМО можно применять, а какие нельзя ГМО применять. Кто против, допустим, тетраплоидной гречихи или гексаплоидной гречихи? Никто не против. А это ГМО. Вот, значит. И пчела тоже не против этого дела. Но почему тогда так легко было принято решение вставлять в геном растений ген Bacillus thuringiensis? Причем серотип, который наиболее токсичен для пчел.
Okay.
Почему нельзя было выбрать серотип Изава или Галерия, который более-менее безопасен для пчел? И почему нельзя выработать территории, действительно, там острова какие-нибудь в Голландии там, или в Германии, найти, где выращивать какую-нибудь ту же самую сою без всяких генно-модифицированных вещей, где обмен невозможен, где будут чистые, можно получить чистые продукты, заменители белков.
Okay, all right. Yeah, thank you for your remark. I covered this briefly in my slides where I was talking about some plants producing an insecticide, and actually theoretically, right now the only such plant we find on the market are the BT crops, but theoretically all kinds of other insecticides could be produced by plants with the proper modification. But here we're focused, in this workshop, we're focused on economic impacts on the beekeeping sector. I can give you a 2-hour presentation on the health impacts on bees, but it's not part of this workshop right now. And I'm more than happy to provide you with the information after this. What I would like to do now, because right now I just want to limit this to questions about understanding the specific remarks of the speakers, to go to Gudrun Beck, who is kind enough to tell us if a beekeeper is not lucky enough to produce honey in a region that is, for example, government-sanctioned GMO-free, but in an area where the potential of contamination exists, then the whole sector needs to rely on the services of honey labs, of GMO labs, to find out what the GMO status of the product is. So as soon as we have the all right. Okay, so please give a warm welcome to Gudrun Beck. Ich habe den Sprecher geklaut.
Hier geht's vorwärts, ne? Pointer gibt's noch. Dieses Rot.
So as Mr. Heffiger announced, he asked me yesterday to shortly prepare you a summary about the technical aspects of these GMO impacts on the market. I myself, I work for QSI, which is a laboratory located in Bremen, Germany. And as you might know, Germany is the biggest importer of honey. So the German market and industry is mostly influenced by this decision of the EU court in 2011. So also the consequence, of course, that the German laboratories, the officials and the private laboratories, concentrated since 2011 also in testing honey for GMO. Because as Mr. Heffiger said, the consumer do not want. The supermarkets have specific requirements, and also the legal requirements did change since then. So I give you a short idea what's technically possible in the moment. Since the actual judgment of the court, EU court, it is very clear that honey might be a product of a GMO plant, but pollen itself is not regarded as a GMO. But as Mr. Heffiger said, if you find pollen, it's an indication that the bees foraged or collected nectar or honeydew of a GMO plant. It is also clear since this judgment that honey, pollen in honey is regarded as an ingredient. This is also causing a lot of trouble and discussions. In the original text of the EU court, it was argued that the pollen mainly comes due to the beekeeping practice via harvesting the honey, but we all know that pollen is also a natural component of honey. Because the bees, they collect together with the nectar, they collect also pollen of the plant. It is also clear in the meantime that honey falls under GMO regulation in the EU, number 1829 from 2003, and thus makes honey, or legally, honey is now regarded as all the other foods concerning the labeling rules, which requires testing if there is any forbidden GMO or testing if there is authorized GMO. And therefore, we tested also, we are specialized in quality control of honey, but we started also testing since 2011, testing for the industry on GMO. So, as Mr. Heffiger said, the purpose of this GMO modification is, for example, that the plant is more resistant against the insecticide or has any specific characteristics. And tolerance against insecticides, immunity against the usage of herbicides, or we can also have in the meantime tailor-made plants by inserting specific DNA sequences. The analytical methodology to test for this GMO is that you first have to extract the solid particles of the honey. It's the same way you do it if you do a pollen analysis. Yeah, so you extract by centrifugation of water soluble honey solution. You extract the solid particles, which are mainly pollen, but of course also other solid particles, like Mr. Haslecker also mentioned, for example, feeding material. And then by centrifugation, you get the sediment of the honey. Then you need to extract the DNA out of the pollen. This could be done by a mechanically cleanup or by a chemical extraction. But it is very important that this step is properly done, because you need to extract all the DNA from the pollen. And then the way of detecting the GMO is the so-called PCR, real-time PCR. And we have in Germany, as already in 2011, we had a workshop in Germany, in Berlin, organized by the ministry, and the ministry also published a technical guideline from an official laboratory in the south of Germany. It's Mr. Weiblinger, who is very experienced in this technique, and he published a guideline how to do this GMO analysis in honey. And this is quite, in my opinion, or in most of the laboratories in Germany, as far as I know, follow more or less this guideline. So you have somehow a harmonization in how to detect GMO in honey. It is, of course, the fact that with this technique, PCR, it is very sensitive. It is possible to detect very low levels. Even some pollen might be enough to find the GMO DNA. So even small amounts of this pollen can lead to the result that there's a non-authorized GMO in your honey. What we do, it's our strategy. It's, of course, there are different strategies possible. First of all, normally you do a screening, because you cannot go for all the different species events. You have to do first a screening, which is to get an overview. Is there GMO in general or not at all? And there are different screening possibilities. What we do is so-called triple screening. and you go for marker sequences, which are common to most of the GMO plants. These sequences are so-called promoters or terminators. They do not express any specific characteristic in the plant, but they are somehow like technical carrier sequences, yeah? But they are common to most of the GMO plants, and so it is possible by detecting this marker to have an idea, is there GMO or not? So this is always the first step. You check, is there GMO or not? So for example, some examples of GMO plants. You see here this marker in Roundup Ready soya, which is the most common one, also grown in Argentina. We have the marker, this 35S. We have NOS as a marker. So in case you find this and this marker, it's a good indication that it could be this soybean. But of course you have to go further to really verify that it's really soybean. But this is the first way to do it. And for the other genetically modified soybeans, it's similar. You have here, for example, you have only 35S. In some Roundup Ready 189788, you have a FMV as a marker. And you have for all the modified plants a specific pattern of these markers. So the first step is this triple screening. Then you can make a decision. If it's negative, you have no GMO and it's marketable honey. In case it's positive, you must check if it's an authorized or non-authorized GMO. Or it's also possible that some of the markers, because some of the markers origin in natural viruses, it's also possible that the marker you find results in a natural virus, and then it's also no GMO. This is also, you have to do this test. The best is, of course, if you have the information of the beekeeper or country of origin, because then you have an idea what is grown in this area and what you can check for, because there are many hundred different of GMO worldwide, and of course it's impossible to test for everything. Yeah, no industry is able to pay for that, and so you must make a risk assessment based on what you know, what is grown. Another additional possibility which could help is the pollen analysis, where you can check is there soybean pollen, is there corn pollen, for example, and this gives you also additional indication. So this is, for example, a list of different GMO events, which are also partly authorized or not authorized in the EU, and so you can imagine it is impossible to test for everything. Yeah? It would take too much time, and it's too expensive as well. So if you have a positive result and a positive possible GMO, we go for event-specific analysis. For example, we can check, is this GMO result due to rapeseed? Is it due to corn? Is it due to soybean? And then we have another possibility. Okay, we see it is corn, then we know corn 1810, for example, is forbidden. Then we check for this one, and if we find some positive, it's not tradable anymore. So if this is also negative, we can market the honey. If it is positive, what we find, we have to look for, has it an authorization or does it have no authorization? And if it has no authorization, honey is not marketable anymore in the EU. The second question is if you have an authorization about the quantification. And this is still not clear. How to interpret this 0.9 threshold. if it's related to the total pollen content in the honey, or it is related to the species. It is technically possible in the moment to quantify per species. So you could quantify how much of maize GMO related to total maize is in your honey. But if you regard it under this aspect, it's very probable if you find, for example, soybean, you find 100% GMO. So this is also under discussion, how to interpret this. So it's in the meantime, I think also in Germany, common sense not to do a quantification of also from official side, unless it's clarified how to interpret this 0.9 threshold. So, what I mentioned also that there are some difficulties in the analytical methods, false positive screening results. False is not correct. Yeah, you could say it's not correct to say false. Yeah, you have a positive result, but this could be due to a natural contamination with this virus, which I mentioned already. So it's not a GMO as well. So as I mentioned, we have no official method how to quantify related to all pollen species in total. We do not know yet how is the correlation of pollen and DNA, so how many pollen correlate to how much DNA. We have also no specific reference material of only one pollen species to say how many pollen of one type in honey result in how much DNA. This 0.9 rule I mentioned already is also under discussion. Yeah, we have of course the problem that the bees or the pollen can fly in the honey. For example, grass pollen, they may fly hundreds of kilometers. Yeah? Even if the beekeepers places the beehives not in a GMO area. So this we don't need. And of course the recommendation that time in 2011 was the best way first is contact your government to look where is really GMO grows and avoid these areas, avoid these crops, and of course you need to test your honey before export to avoid problems by import, and yeah, you need to be informed about what's going on in your country, about authorization in these countries of GMO. So, thank you for your attention, and
Thank you very much. Now, please, just questions about understanding the specific presentation. So we'll have a more general discussion. So, Gudrun, if there are questions over there.
Just to have an idea.
Thank you for your presentation. Just to have an idea, how much are we looking for analyzing a sample of honey? The
Price-wise?
Price-wise, yeah.
how much it costs for testing. Let's say the average price for such a triple screening might be about 100 to 150 euro. Only the screening, and then you go to events, you have prices from 20, 30, 40 euro about that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Maybe one remark, if you are a small regional beekeeper doing specialty honeys and your batch is 100 kilos that you analyze, these costs are a significant higher percentage as if I am a big importer and the batch that this sample is supposed to represent is several tons. Okay.
Sure.
All right.
Yeah.
Your additional question?
You told that the plants are GMO, but not pollen, in the beginning of your presentation.
Yeah,
So
the
it's
court
not-
said pollen itself is not a GMO because pollen is no organism. Yeah, it's just a part of an organism. Yeah, but it comes from a GMO plant.
Yeah, but because that it's not really clear for me how it's possible that GMO is harmful for humans.
This is something Mr.
This is
Heffinger
actually
can
a different subject, okay? Basically, all these regulations are based on the assumption and that a genetically modified organism, because the method, primarily the method of inserting these genes, can cause all kinds of unintended side effects. The assumption is it's not safe, and it has to go through an authorization process. So that's why you had in this lab test completely irrespective of the labeling question for importing into the EU. You have to do a GMO test because at this point you don't know whether you have an unauthorized event that would prevent you from marketing it at all. So basically the assumption behind this regulation, without an authority carefully checking, we don't know whether this is safe for human consumption, and there have been examples in the past where products have been created and not being placed on the market because already in the animal tests they showed serious negative side effects. I think the most famous example are some genetically modified peas that were created in Australia. And the reason is that when the modification is not like you modify a text on your word processor, right? And so you can figure out that you successfully place the event into the plant. So now it's tolerant to the herbicide, for example, or you can find that it expresses the insecticide. But without a lot of study, you don't know how you have rearranged the genetic code and what other side effects you have caused. So essentially we have, in Europe, we have two levels. You have the governmental level where they're trying to figure out whether it's safe on the market, then you have an approved product. And you have the consumer level, so then it's up to the consumer whether he actually personally thinks that's good enough. You know? So as a consumer, you still have to, through labeling, you can say, okay, the government thinks this is safe, but I don't. All right? Okay. Is that correct? Okay. All right.
Sure, you know.
Okay.
It's better than me.
All right. Okay. So far, thank you very much, Gudrun. It was very helpful. Now, so far, this whole session was very German-centric. We desperately need to do something about that, okay? And that's why I would like to jump to the Southern Hemisphere, okay? And give Norberto Garcia the opportunity to share with us how these impacts look like from that part of the world. Give a warm welcome to Norberto Garcia. First name is German though, or Austrian, right? Norberto?
Yes.
So
I'm not German.
Yeah.
All right. Yes.
Go ahead. And you need to hit your microphone button.
Oh,
All right.
Well, thank you very much. I come indeed from the end of the world, from Argentina. For some reason, when we talk about GMOs, we think of Argentina. So here I am to give my version, to give our point of view. I am representing Nexco. Nexco is the main Argentine honey exporter. I'm professor of a national university, and I am the secretary of the International honey exporters organization. So my view is the market view, the Argentine market view and the international market view. Fine.
This is to change the red one? No, the next.
Okay. First of all, mainly for Ukrainian people, I will try to briefly present the profile of our country. Depending on the year, Argentina is the third world honey producer after China and the USA. We contribute with more or less 20% of the traded honey all over the world. And particularly, Argentina cultivates GMOs, no doubt, but only authorized GMOs are cultivated in Argentina. We follow the normal registration procedures, and only after the European Union authorized a GMO crop, we authorized it. We are honey exporters, and during the last years we have surpassed many crises of the market. We'll remember 10 years ago the dumping and subsidies case for Argentine honey to the US, then the natural varieties you issued in 2003. Afterwards, just 4 years ago, the pyrrolidine alkaloids to honey exported to Germany. So all of these issues have been successfully overcome with great effort of our honey chain in Argentina. 2 years ago, a new issue, the GMO issue. As I said, Argentina only authorizes food GMO plants also authorized in the European Union. After the European Union Court of Justice verdict, we developed in our company the technology. No, we did not develop, we adopted. We bought the technology to test our honeys and to know what portion of our honeys were GMO-free and what portion contained authorized GMOs. Of course, the advance of agriculture pushed beekeepers to non-traditional areas in Argentina. Argentina traditionally produced honey in the main humid area. But as the yields went down and down, the beekeepers went to other areas, less producing areas in the past, but better producing areas now. In the past, we produced as an average, for example, 60 kilograms per hive. Now, 25 kilograms is a good yield. So the parameters have changed. That meant a great crisis in our production. 5 to 10 years ago, now we think we have arrived to a new equilibrium in our production profile. So, when we started testing our honey, we saw that honey produced in these semi-arid lands, not very good, or not good at all for agriculture, but the honey was GMO-free. Of course, other honeys produced in the main agricultural area contain authorized GMOs. We know this now. 2 years ago, we suspected, but now we know. So, at the present time, we have the capacity to provide different types of honey depending on the importing country specifications. We consider we have already adapted once again to our clients' demands. Well, from the market point of view, what happened after 2011 in the market? No label changes have occurred yet. May occur soon, but not yet. The European Commission has just proposed, to consider pollen a component of honey and not an ingredient. No notifications in the rapid alert system for food and feed on GMOs containing honey have occurred. About the impact this verdict brought to the honey market, if you watch, if you see, if you study European Union honey trade statistics, you may see some important changes during the last years. We agree that the GMO issue was responsible in part of that changes. But that is not, the GMO issue is not the only factor that happened during the last 2 years. Other events occur all over the world in the market. For example, let's see what happened in the US market since 2010. As you can see, the US market, another very important importing market of honey, after 2010, sharply decreased the importation of Asian honey. For other reasons, not the GMO issue. As there is a lack of honey all over the world, when one part of the world buys especially one honey, the other honey goes to the other part of the world. And as the US now needs more than 60% of the honey they consume, because their production is really harder and more expensive each year, they sharply increased the imports of honey from the rest of the American continent, Canada and South America, to replace Asian honey. Now the question is, where did that honey went? No, where did that honey go? Excuse me. The next in Spanish. Not in German, it's possible.
No worries.
So the thing is that, that during the last years, the European Union, for any reason, sharply increased the imports of cheaper honey. No matter quality things, issues, only the important thing is the price. My apologies, but in the sense of the market view, I can not consider only one factor. I have to consider many factors at the same time. This important shift on our point of view will have more severe consequences to the beekeeping industry, because I am a beekeeper and you are beekeepers. And this is, the GMO issue is important, no doubt. But this is more important, not only for the consumers, because since the last years they are consuming different honey they used to, but for the local beekeepers, because many beekeepers around the European Union will not find profitable their activities if this continues. This will have a direct impact in the beekeepers and a longer term impact on the environment and on the crops that depend on the bees in Europe. We have to talk about this and the GMOs altogether. No, this. Supposing that the verdict is not modified, it will have an impact, surely, on European beekeepers, of course. Those beekeepers that produce honey in countries that really don't grow GMOs, well, I think they will have a benefit, a good opportunity. They will be offering the consumers a product that the consumers choose, and they have sincerely the freedom, the right to choose that product. Beekeepers from other countries in the European Union that allow GMO crops may be in difficulties to locate the colonies. They will have to analyze the honeys. That will be added costs. Who will pay the costs? The whole chain, perhaps. And if the verdict continues, all third countries that depend only in the European market will have a problem. But not those countries that actually can send different types of honey to different countries with different specifications. Actually, Argentina, I saw your map, it said Europe, the ship, and Argentina was there at the end of the one. Is sending 70% of its honey to the US market. The 30% is to the rest of the world. The second destination is Japan. And then the third destination is Germany, which is the European country that maintains the flag of quality. That's one side of the story. My question is, I was hearing your presentation, and I indeed agree with you that the consumers must be informed. So we may have, please correct me, I'm thinking this scenario. One case of a honey, GMO-free. Okay, so the consumer is informed and can choose that honey. Well, another honey that in the future may have a label that says it may contain, for example, may contain authorized GMOs. Okay. But there is a third jar of honey, and I don't know, I don't have very clear what the label will say. We say, this jar contains honey imported from a country that we don't actually know if it has GMOs or not, because we really don't know the technology, and if they have locally developed GMO events that cannot be detected with regular procedures. And the consumers must know that. Let's defend all the consumers. So, as you said, this will be a long story, but let's treat it as a whole, and let's defend the consumers, and let's inform the consumers with the best and the most complete information. The rest I don't know, because I cannot read it. We agree that we are, as beekeepers, because I represent a honey exporting a company, but I am also a beekeeper, so sometimes I mix my roles. We are really worried about the degree of perfection, about the image of honey after the GMO crisis. We ask, hasn't all this gone too far? Poland, because I am a beekeeper and I'm not a lawyer, has been always considered a component of honey. No matter what the lawyers may say, I am a beekeeper. I think it's time to realize that we as beekeepers are not really competitors. We are colleagues. Honey is lacking. Honey all over the world is not enough to cover the demand. So when the demand is greater than the offer, the competition of different actors of the offer are not competitors. They not compete. They must work each other. They have the same interests. Let's think not in the short term, but in the long term. Let's put aside short-term interests and never forget to preserve the image of the consumer, of our pure, natural, and wholesome pleasure, which is honey. Thank you very much.
For your spirited and very informative presentation. Are there questions from the audience? Actually,
just one question. It was mentioned from the speaker that the honey yield dropped down in Argentina from 60 kilos, I guess, to 20, 25.
On average.
Yes, because the beekeepers had to move out of the beneficial areas. So is this maybe a side effect of GMO growing of soybean or so? Or what's the side effect? What's
the main issue is that agriculture is more profitable than cattle growing all over the world. The humanity needs food, and the cheapest way is to produce grains. No matter what crop, what grain, GMO, I have this, can you hear this? The thing is that herbicides, you say herbicides, eliminate wildflowers. And that is the main reason the beekeepers have to go to other areas. The problem is not the soybean, it's that there is only soybean. Indeed, the lack of use of insecticides is a benefit in some way to the bees. If you compare it with the previous situation. Many bees died for the application of insecticides. It's not now the main issue. The problem are not insecticides for us, the beekeepers, but the herbicides. No wildflowers. So we had to move our colonies to more natural areas. In Argentina, the Atlantic portion receives the humid winds and you have good rains. But as you go to the Andes area, you go inside the continent, the rains go down and down. So there's no agriculture there. There's all semi-arid areas with natural shrubs and natural species, good pollen. We have no mortalities, no massive mortalities. The problem of the disappearing of bees is not an issue for us. We have healthy bees because we have good natural pollen, but our yields have decreased. And we survived because we can sell our honey at good prices. We need to defend the price of honey. And the GMOs issue also had an impact because it's a whole technology. It's easier and more economical for the farmer to produce a GMO crop. Easier and lower cost. But suppose any scenario where the GMOs disappear from Argentina and the rest of the world, farmers will continue growing crops using herbicides and insecticides to produce that crops, and the cattle will go to more marginal areas because it is a more inefficient way to produce food. When you produce food, the energy from the sun goes directly to that food. When you produce cattle, the cattle has to eat the food and then produce another food, and there's a loss between. So that is impossible to change. So, sorry for the emphasis.
There is maybe the European answer to this question is that originally the regulation and the impact assessment was looking just as the plant. And just like you said, it's not the plant. In this particular case, it's the herbicide. But if the only purpose of the genetic modification of that plant is to enable the widespread use of that herbicide, okay? Then when you're assessing the impact, you have to look at the farming system. Roundup Ready, so you have to look at the impact of the plant and the herbicide that it's designed to use, and you can look at the numbers. And that's why, at least now in Europe, we would consider the impact, or at least some of the impact that you observed, that the beekeepers had to leave the area because there are no wildflowers, because you have plants that enable this heavy herbicide use. If you don't have this farming system, of course, you're also using herbicides, but you cannot use the herbicides so pervasively that the wildflowers go to zero. On the insecticide side, initially when 10 years ago when I was the new kid on the board and had the new problem to deal with, of course we also were constantly dealing with bee kills due to insecticides. So the GMO industry came to us, hey, guess what? We have a plant that protects itself,
yes.
you know? And so said, okay, now how exactly does it protect itself from insects? Does it grow a thick bark or something, you know? Well, it produces an insecticide, but don't worry, this insecticide is safe. I said, well, who tested that, okay? What I also found out, okay, and it's easy to check, the plants, the BT plants that don't produce that do produce their own insecticide do not produce enough of it in the initial stages of growth, which means part of the farming system is that actually the seed companies require you to coat the seed with neonicotinoids. It's actually part of the farming system. And it's the exact thing, if you just look at the plant itself and the modification, you can look at what are the consequences of BT, and we can have a whole other workshop about that. But when you look at the farming system, the use of neonicotinoid seed treatment is actually part of the required treatment to enable this farming system. So in fact, when you look at the statistics, where these plants are being used, insecticide use is not going down. Okay?
Yes.
And
and indeed,
yeah.
your honey yields are not 60 kilograms in Europe. There has been a disappearing of wildflowers in Europe, and that's another reason of colony collapse disorder. So, in case, as I said, we forget GMOs, Argentina will continue producing grains.
Mm.
And what about honey yields? Maybe 20, 25, 30, 20, I don't know, depending on the year, but no more than 60, 70, 100 kilograms per hive when no herbicides were used. That's the point.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now I think it's time for our coffee break. From past chairman, I know that there's not necessarily a guarantee of coffee being available during the coffee break. So, but let's meet back here at 11:30, if that's all right with you. And then we'll basically go and continue to with our tour around the world at different perspectives on the GMO impact. Thank you very much. So I hope you managed to find some coffee for the coffee break and maybe some fresh air. And we're now continuing our tour around the world to take a look at the impacts and how they're being dealt with in different parts of the world. And we're going back to Europe, but this time not Northern Europe like Germany, but Southern Europe like Greece and funny. Please take the floor. Did you want a presentation?
No.
Okay, all right.
It's on?
All right.
Good morning, because it's still morning. Good morning, everybody. I'm a scientist from Greece. My name is Fani Patrina, and I work in the Hellenic Institute of Agriculture. And although I'm a scientist, I should present some results. No results. Today I will just talk to you. I will not show you anything. In fact, I will tell a few things about the position of my country for the GMOs. And because Professor Emanuel, who is in the committee, of the Greek committee in EFSA and in European Parliament for this aspect is not present, so I have some notes and I will present a few things, and then I might then give you a few hints for my work that it could be related to the GMOs as well. So the Greek position for the BT maize Monarch 810, because that's why that's what Greece was asked to prepare our portfolio. It is all about for use and marketing is the following. Since September 2011, and now it's almost 2 years, my country decided that we cannot permit the use of this particular variety for use, cultivation, and marketing in our country. It seems that together with Hungary, Austria, Luxembourg, France, Germany, and Poland, we're just a few countries that we don't permit this. And if I look at the arguments And the reasons why Greece has taken this position, I see that there are mainly four. And the first one is because I think that it's in let's say in the regulations, it's recommended that when this particular variety should be used for cultivation, then the plots that could be used, they should be more than 5 hectares. However, agricultural plots in Greece are very small, and as an average, there are about 1.95 hectares per farm. That means that even if you have neighboring plots, they belong to different owners, so you cannot take them into account altogether. Then there is very high density of colonies. If I remember well, it's something about between 9 and 12 colonies per square kilometer, but I cannot be sure just now for the number. However, we are second in Europe after Hungary. And the third reason, as they put it down, is that there is very rich flora and fauna in all Mediterranean countries, in Greece as well, although not everything has been measured and recorded as far as to my knowledge. That means that any impact, it could not be in a few organisms, it could be in much more. And the fourth, which I'm not really understanding it very, very much, is that we have one of the poorest, in terms of organic matter, agricultural soils in Europe. So, in this argument of the Greek government, in this struggle for not permitting the GMO cultivation of this maize variety in Greece, there are some points that they are related to the negative effects that they have been found in the non-target organisms. Like, for example, fitness of certain important natural enemies of the target enemies of the plants. Like the effects on a lot of aquatic species. And so what you can see in my country is that you can see that there are a lot of water patches, a lot of water resources, and especially in North Greece, all these cultivated plots for maize are very close to water resources. Then there are effects on soil dwelling decomposing organisms. That is, I think that most of them, they belong to Diptera, but there are also nematodes, there are isopods, there are root mycorrhiza, and also earthworm species that they have been affected. So all these are going together in one argument of the Greek government. There is also the argument that a crop rotation could help the situation, and so you don't have the problems to a high extent. However, there is no data on it. And then we go into bees. I do agree with what Walter said before, that bees are not just a target organism. It's not like the lepidoptera or whatever, earthworms. It's one of the most important species for our economy. Beekeeping is traditional in Greece. And from what some of the studies have found is that the effects on bees could go from gland development, brood development in the colony, learning performance, in vitro larva development, synergetic effects. There are a lot, although the studies that they have been addressed these problems, there are not many, and maybe they are not enough to convince other people that we should not cultivate it, this particular or other GMO varieties. Think though that the effects that I mentioned on bees, they are related not only because bees are taking nectar, but because they are taking pollen. However, from corn, they don't take so much pollen, but they could take from other plants. And it's the pollen probably that makes so much damage, because the pollen is eaten by the nurse bees, and then you have the development of plants. And pollen is also, even in smaller quantities, it's fed to the larva. And if you had your grown-ups getting some substances that they are not the best for them, for their development, what do you expect to have in their adulthood? As I told you, I'm a scientist. This is the position of Greece, the government, and the position of the Beekeepers Association. But me as a scientist, I'm working on pesticides effects, and especially the last year on the effects of neonics. However, what are these toxins are doing? What are these these varieties, these GMO cultivars are doing? They are producing insecticides. So it's a different mode of action, but it's again it's an insecticide. So if you see it from this point of view, we should really look into what are their effects. And I don't want to go into details, of course, because for some reason, the last 2 years, I could not get my hands into Cry1AB toxin to do my experiments like I'm doing with the pesticides. So for me, this is something that tells me something. They don't give me the toxin. Why they don't give me the toxin? I even came into contact with the company, with Monsanto, but even the laboratories. A few hints only, and I will not take so much of your time. Think that any pesticide, any herbicide, any miticide has direct effects, has indirect effects, given temperature, whatever. But what I'm really scared of is what we call delayed effects. And this is something that I want to look into the neonics as well. Because when a colony is storing nectar and has this nectar storing the nectar as honey and is used this honey later on, even for winter maintenance or mainly the pollen, and can use this pollen in the beginning of spring when it has most of its needs for the development, then that's what we call delayed effects. And we tried, many colleagues of me, through Colos also, probably you have heard about Colos, we tried to see what's going on after wintering of pollen and nectar that is stored in the colonies with toxic substances. 2 days ago, I gave a very detailed talk on my results on the effects of neonics imidacloprid on the bees. And that's why I didn't want to show anything today, because this is not exactly the scope of this talk. But I would like to leave you with one question. If we think that we can treat our crops with insecticides or with any kind of pesticide this year, and we can change it next year, what is happening with this kind of toxins that they are in the plant and they are there, the same one every year? Resistance. And I think it's even more important than the effects that we see today, because you can't do anything about it. And here every year, day after day, there are more works, scientific works, that they show exactly that the target organisms now, they show resistance to these toxins. And just now, a colleague of mine in the break, she told me that there is another publication from Africa this time, in +1, showing that even in Africa, that there are not so many GMO varieties cultivated, resistance has already started. So this is really a very big question for me, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Fanny. Are there any questions from the audience? I just want to maybe bring to your attention, when you're talking about resistance of the target species, there is a paper that when the genome of the honeybee was mapped, they looked at what detoxification mechanisms are available. And because bees have a different relationship with plants, they're not trying to eat them, but their plants are doing all kinds of things to attract them as pollinators. During the evolution of the honeybee, there wasn't a great need to be very capable in detoxifying. So when the pests become resistant, they're building on the tools that they already have, okay? And the honeybee, on the other hand, has very little to work with in that area. So the pests will be resistant long before the bees would be. And there's the intermediate step. As we're approaching resistance, the first response is not to switch to another product, because that's a long development cycle, but the first response is to increase the dose. Okay?
That's what I'm afraid of.
Yeah, and when you have that, you're increasing the dose for the target, which means the risk for the non-target species goes up. Thank you very much.
I hope next time I will have some results of my own.
Okay, we'll lean that you get the toxin, you know, I already tried to help. In our tour around the world, we have the opportunity to hear from our host country. And we don't want to make this German-centric, and we don't want to make this EU-centric. So I'm really glad that
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dear colleague, I'm Dr. Rudenka from Ukrainian Institute of Animal Science. I'm director of Department of Ecological Monitoring, and this problem that we discussed today is very actual for our country, and I think that during our decision we can make some proposition for our Apimondia resolution, because I very interested in experience of my colleague from Argentina, because they produce organic production, they produce natural production, and nevertheless they produce a lot of products that are contaminated by GMO. That is why, if it's possible to hear us, because I'm a representative of 400,000 beekeepers from Ukraine, if it's possible to include and in the resolution of these countries and recommended it of our government and recommended it of our Minister of Agriculture to make some monitoring plan of GMO agricultural culture, and that is why we can control situation, because Ukraine also potential exporter of honey to Europe and to United States. That is why I hope that our meeting today is very, very actual. Thank you very much, and I hope for your support.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. As Mr. Garcia knows, the attitude that you asked for in your presentation, that we're all colleagues, we're all beekeepers, and we're not competitors, was exactly the attitude, I think, that allowed us to work together right after the verdict. You know, just by coincidence, but it was a good coincidence, the Apimondia, right after this verdict in Europe was in Argentina, gave us an opportunity to sit down. But my personal goal was, I wanted to make sure that as many beekeepers as possible in these countries continue to be able to export to Europe. And you know, that's why I suggested working on the map, or in Chile is a different thing. And so I really like your suggestion to maybe include some language in the Apimondia resolution, because as I mentioned in my presentation, and what the example of Argentina shows, if a government makes the decision to allow GMO cultivation, they have a responsibility to think about the impact on other stakeholders, on non-users of this technology, and they have a responsibility of taking steps to minimize those impacts. There is some experience from different parts of the world on how to do it. For example, the German experience is a field-by-field coexistence register. Okay? The Argentinian experience is a regional map, not a by-farmer map. You know? And for example, one of the suggestions I made is if you have a region that is very much GMO-free and you have a lot of producers that are there because it's GMO-free, maybe you want to pay a farmer not to cultivate. He might be free to do it, but it might break your region. You know, if you want to pay him to stay this way, just like, for example, the city of Munich, in order to protect their water supply, paid the farmers in upstream of Munich to convert to organic, because it saves them the filtering cost in the drinking water. You know? So there are all kinds of approaches that you can think of where you can adapt solutions from other countries to your specific context. But in any event, I think a clear message from Apimondia to governments should be, if you permit the cultivation, you have certain responsibilities. And with that, I saw a question in the audience there.
I wanted
Please wait for the microphone so that everybody can hear you and the translators have a chance, okay?
I wanted to know if Ukraine produce GMOs, and the former speaker could answer that.
The question to you whether...
I wanted to know if Ukraine produce GMOs.
No. In Ukraine, we take the law about GMO products, but nevertheless, officially, I underline, officially, in Ukraine, anybody grows agricultural culture such as maize, rape, sunflower, but nevertheless.
Please use the microphone.
So the translators.
Okay, I try to. They try to translate. Excuse me. But nevertheless, in Ukraine, start to grow a lot of Canadian sunflower GMO. In Ukraine, some farmers produce some European maize and also rape GMO. That is why I organize monitoring system in Ukraine, and we step by step try to receive such information. But understand, I'm not one person. It's not decision this problem in Ukraine. That is why I hope that we together make such mutual opinion on this problem. And now in Ukraine, officially, we are not produce GMO culture.
Okay, the contribution from Gudrun Beck.
On the technical, yeah. Okay. Some comments from the technical side. As I mentioned, Germany is also importing a lot of honey from the Ukraine. And from my experience from testing, anyway, he says there is no official GMO growth. We find positive GMO in Ukraine honey. And the risk is if we do not know what they grow, yeah, you can only recommend not to import. Mm-hmm. If we know what it is, we could say, okay, this is authorized, this is not a big risk. But if we do not know, we have to say to the client, I would not recommend to import it because your risk is too big that maybe in half a year somebody finds out what it is and it finds it is not authorized, and you have your packed honey on the shelf and you have to take it back here. And this is much more risk. Therefore, I also recommend also the beekeeper, it's very important to know what is grown.
And that's exactly, if the government does nothing, okay? Yeah. The impact on the non-using sector, okay, is tremendous. You have tremendous analysis cost and tremendous risk. It's an absolute responsibility of the government to take charge of this. And I just want to alert you to the fact that in the Beekeeping Symposium 2, today, I think it's today, it's one of my presentations anyway, I will have a presentation specifically on monitoring gene flow, and something that I've been working on that might help this problem, where we actually leverage private sector analysis to create the maps. Just like in Argentina, prior to the verdict, nobody, or I wouldn't say nobody, but very few people paid attention how this problem was distributed, okay?
Yes.
And it is possible, actually through honey analysis that you have to do anyway, to make it visible, you know?
Yes, because at first we must inform our beekeepers.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And beekeeper decided for himself if it Poland gets it honey or not, gets it from this. Yes, of course.
Exactly. And there's good news and bad news in this, because there's a scientific paper from Germany that I will provide to you, that shows if you want to monitor a region for GMO contamination, you can set up mechanical pollen traps, you can build all kinds of devices, okay?
Yeah.
But by far, the best way of monitoring is analyzing honey, okay?
Yeah.
It's the easiest contaminant, so the bad news is you can get it easy as a beekeeper. The good news is, and we've made proposals both at the German and the European level, as beekeepers we can actually contribute to the monitoring and help the government minimize our risk. Okay. Do we have more questions on this? Otherwise, I'm going to jump to another country if I haven't lost the speaker. Alex? Okay, back there, okay? All right. He's hiding in the very back of the room. So would like to welcome Alexandros Papachristoforu from Cyprus, with a small country perspective on this.
I tried to hide, but you found me. So, good morning, everybody. There's not much to say, actually. That's why I was hiding. I'm a scientist, but luckily, fortunately, I don't have results on this scientific field, because in Cyprus we don't have GMOs for the moment, though I know unofficially that's a lot of pressure from companies to the new Cypriot government, that it happens to be very weak due to the economic crisis, to allow somehow to find a way to allow the cultivation or exploitation of GMOs on the island. We hope that we manage to keep it like this. Unfortunately, there are some other problems, for example, the analysis. The scientific sector of apiculture on the island is really premature. We have very few labs that they have somehow a kind of specification. The university is, at the university's apiculture, we teach apiculture only the last 2 years. It's a new agricultural university. And I don't think that anybody could do the analysis that you show us. And I'm afraid that on this way they cannot even detect any possible imported honey, because in Cyprus we have a lot of importation of low quality, low price honey, fortunately. But it's good to be here, so I take the knowledge, get back and see what I can do. The most important is that the Union of Beekeepers is quite active, so it's trying to keep with all these forces to follow the example of Greece and keep GMOs out of the island. It's a very restricted island, more or less we have the same 4 reasons that Fanny mentioned before: very small plots, a lot of water, biodiversity, etc. A lot of bees. The density is also very high in Cyprus. That's it, and just watch, listen, and learn more than just stand. Thank you, Walter. Any questions?
Thank you, Alexandros. Any questions to Alex? If not, I would like Francesco Panella from Italy, from UNAPI, to speak to us. Did you get your translator? Okay, all right. Okay. Is there somebody that can just help Francesco? Okay, Anne, very much. Francesco, Anne will translate for you if you speak in French. Okay? We're beekeepers, we know how to improvise.
Okay. Bonjour à tout le monde. Je m'excuse, je suis apiculteur âgé. C'est pour ça que je ne savais pas que l'anglais allait devenir la langue mondiale.
Good morning, everybody. I'm sorry, I'm an old beekeeper, and I didn't know that the English would become the world language.
Mais j'irai à l'étudier, j'espère.
But I will start studying it, I hope.
Je crois que nous, on a la chance d'être dans un pays où on n'a pas encore des cultivations OGM.
We have the chance to be in a country where we don't have GMO crops for the moment.
Et où on a une sensibilité sociale des consommateurs et politiques sur cet aspect que c'est très particulier.
And where social sensibility from consumers and politics is very strong and special.
Mais on commence à voir il y a quelques années déjà des problèmes par des cultivations avec des semis obtenus par
we started a couple of years ago to get some problems with seeds from mutagenesis.
De colza, non, en Italie, les problèmes sont sur le tournesol, mais aussi le colza qui peut être traité jusqu'à la 4e feuille avec un herbicide.
This appeared on sunflowers and rapeseed, and sunflower can be treated with an herbicide until the 4th leaf.
Une sulfinurea, la famille c'est celle des molécules de sulfinurea, mais ce qui est intéressant c'est que ces semis sont utilisés, et je me rappelle que ça c'est déjà tombé, on n'a pas considéré le potentiel effet sur le pollinisateur.
What is interesting is that these seeds were seeded, and we didn't consider the effect on pollinators before.
Comme ils sont donnés avant la floraison, c'est vrai que ce sont des molécules qui entrent avec une activité systémique peut-être dans la plante, mais comme dans les cas des néoniques, ils ne sont pas donnés par irroration. Donc, le risque pour le pollinisateur n'a pas été considéré.
It's true that those molecules have a systemic effect, but
la molécule, en effet, entre dans la plante et le risque pour le pollinisateur n'a pas été.
And the risk for the pollinator wasn't studied.
Donc, nous sommes en train de faire de l'expérience scientifique du champ, peut-être comme celle des néoniques.
So we are started scientific experiments in fields. Perhaps it will be like neonics.
Pour qui est peut-être une autre fois que un risque a été postulé comme qui n'existait pas.
To check that another time a risk was said before as inexistent.
Ceci dit, je voudrais tout simplement mettre l'accent sur cette développement de la conception de l'agriculture après la guerre, dans le dernier siècle.
I would like to underline the development of the agriculture after the Second War in the 20th century.
Après une augmentation très importante de la production, on a tout simplement, sur ce succès énorme, très important, on a commencé à considérer l'agriculture de toute autre façon, rester à la tradition culturelle et scientifique de l'agronomie qui l'homme a maturé pendant des siècles et des siècles.
After this big growth of production, we totally forgot the agronomy thinking that the human had created for centuries.
Et des années 90 en avant, 88, on a des fournisseurs qui ont proposé des pesticides et des mutations génétiques qui allaient dans le même sens. C'est la même conception de l'agriculture.
From the 90s, the industry proposed pesticides and genetics modification that goes in the same way.
Avec deux objectifs, la réduction de la chimie, l'augmentation de la production. C'est ça.
To propose the reduction of the chemicals and the growth of the production.
Ces deux objectifs, c'est évident aujourd'hui, n'ont pas été absolument d'aucun côté obtenus.
Those two purposes were absolutely not reached.
Le marché mondial et l'utilisation mondiale des pesticides augmentent en valeur chaque année.
The international market of pesticides every year increase.
Ça change simplement la composante entre les différentes familles chimiques.
The only thing that changed is the composites between the different family of chemicals.
Herbicides,
insecticides,
fongicides, etc. Et on n'a pas aucune augmentation de la production qu'on puisse présenter à la place.
And there isn't any augmentation of the production.
Et ce que c'est évident, c'est que on cache complètement ce résultat.
What is obvious is that this result is completely hidden.
Et on cache le fait que tout ça, c'est une conception de l'agriculture qui nie le fait que l'agriculture et l'homme, ils font part de la nature, des phénomènes de la nature même.
All this is a conception of the nature that deny the fact that the man is a part of this nature.
Donc, on a parlé aujourd'hui, et c'est très bien ce que j'ai écouté et ce que j'ai compris, des conséquences pas prévues et indirectes.
What I've heard from what was said today, it's very good.
Mais je crois qu'il faut faire une réflexion des limites, des défauts même de la critique de ceux qui ont essayé de mettre en discussion ce modèle.
But I think we have to really think about the limits of this model.
Oui. On a indiqué un risque pour comme prioritaire, on a travaillé sur les émotions. Bon, dans une guerre, on utilise la guerre, l'émotion, la communication, c'est très important. Et on a indiqué le risque pour la santé humaine.
We showed the risk for human health, and we worked on emotions.
Et ça, c'est pour ça que les Italiens sont aussi sensibles.
That's why Italian people are so sensitive for this issue.
La santé individuelle avant tout.
Individual health before everything.
Et le problème, c'est pas la santé des humains, peut-être. Mais ce qui est sûr, c'est la santé de la terre, du vivant.
The issue is not the human health, but what is sure is the issue of the planet, the Earth's health.
De la même chose, on peut le dire sur le problème de la pollinisation.
We can say the same thing about pollination.
On considère seulement l'aspect économique de la pollinisation des cultures.
We only consider the economic aspect of the crop pollination.
C'est possible une pollinisation des cultures qui ne considère aussi l'aspect économique de la pollinisation de tout ce qui est la botanique sauvage. C'est dans le même milieu. C'est fait par l'humain, être vivant.
It's important also to consider the impact of pollination of wild plants. It's also living.
Donc, je crois que comme nous sommes agriculteurs, élévateurs d'un animal qui est justement une bonne partie de l'environnement,
as we are farmers and that we care about an animal which is a part of the environment,
on a la charge de tout simplement de devoir dire et de montrer que le roi, c'est nous.
We must say that we are the king.
Parce que le roi, c'est complètement nous.
Because we really are the king.
Le problème que je pose aujourd'hui, et qui je crois qu'on doit commencer à réfléchir,
The issue that I want to put on the table today,
c'est évident, et je suis bien d'accord, qu'on ne doit pas utiliser ça pour la concurrence entre apiculteurs.
I agree that we must not use the issue for the competitivity between agriculture, between growers.
Mais qu'il faut trouver la façon, les apiculteurs qui sont, c'est dommage, mais c'est comme ça, en première ligne, et les chercheurs, et la partie de la société qui est sensible, ensemble, à soulever les doigts pour dire le roi c'est nous. Et donc,
we have to find a solution for the society, the beekeepers, and the scientists to say that we are the king.
nous sommes la démonstration que la coexistence c'est impossible. Nos abeilles le disent.
We, beekeepers, are the demonstration that coexistence is impossible. Our bees cannot respect any coexistence rule.
Il faut trouver la force pour le dire, et le dire bien, où il faut le dire.
We have to find the strength to say it, and to say it well.
Il y a une partie des associations apicoles européennes
A board of European Beekeeping Association
a travaillé pour soulever ce doigt où il fallait le soulever.
A part of the European Beekeeping Association worked to show this issue, this point.
Nous avons travaillé pour fonder une action, une association sur le risque environnemental pour les abeilles.
We worked to create an association regarding the environmental risk of bees, for bees.
De pesticides et de OGM.
The environmental risk of pesticides and GMOs.
Et cette coordination a travaillé jusqu'à aujourd'hui sur ces deux aspects et a obtenu, je crois, de faire voir, de commencer à faire voir que le roi c'est nu, petit et aussi mauvais.
This coordination worked until today on these two issues, and this coordination started to show that we are the king.
Pour le faire, on a fait un investissement important. Pour le faire bien, comme il faut.
To do that and to do it well, we produced an important investment.
Pour le faire, comme nous sommes des professionnels apicoles, il faut avoir des professionnels pour le doigt. C'est autre métier.
As we are professional beekeepers, we need to get professional fingers to show the thing.
Et je crois que ça c'est la défi de futur, de survivance de notre métier, de l'agriculture et aussi de l'humanité.
This is the difficulty of our future and our survival for beekeeping and humanity.
Et j'invite tout le monde à considérer qu'il n'est pas suffisant se voir, c'est important, mais ce n'est pas suffisant.
And I would like everybody to consider that it is not sufficient to see each other and to meet each other. It's good, but it's not sufficient.
Et je suis enthousiaste de cette session d'Apimondia.
I'm really enthusiastic for this Apimondia session.
Mais il faut donner des jambes aux doigts pour qu'on puisse faire un travail continuatif.
But we need to give legs to finger so that we can continue our work in a good way.
Et je vous invite à bien considérer que pour faire ensemble, il faut y mettre des ressources et le faire ensemble.
I really want you to consider that to do it and to do it well together, we need to get some resources, some funds to do it and to keep on doing it.
Et le faire vite.
And we have to do
Pas
it
rester à la
quickly.
fenêtre. C'est ça
And we
que je
must
vous
not
invite.
stay
Merci
at the window. Thank you very much.
For your contribution. And unless there are additional speakers hiding in the back. I would like to welcome the speakers that have addressed you before to come to the table, because I want to open the floor to your questions, to your general questions. I think Francesco's contribution was excellent for this, because he took a broad and philosophical view. So your questions are no longer limited to what the speaker just said, but we would like to take your input. No, please. You know, we don't want to be very bureaucratic. Fanny had to leave because there's a pesticide roundtable coming up. No, please. All right, Alex, coming from the shadows. Okay, do we have somebody handling the microphone? Roberto? If you shoot the mic. Okay. There's the sign. Don't be confused by the signs. All right. Okay. Got the first question. This is all right.
Okay, I would like to ask you, yeah. I don't know who, maybe some of you can answer to this. What do you think about the draft proposal that the European Commission is preparing to change the honey directive? Yeah? It's not working. Maybe you can repeat this.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So the question was, this was mentioned earlier in several presentations. Number one, there was the European Court of Justice ruling in a court case that Bavarian beekeepers, you're looking at one of them, brought that basically made sure that honey wasn't outside of all the rules that apply to all other foods in the European Union. And there is a proposal by the Commission to make something that looks like a small change. The proposal is to change a text in the regulation stating that honey is a natural, pollen is a natural ingredient or natural constituent of honey, and therefore they're trying to basically undo at least part of this court ruling. The court was actually not asked, and nor did it try to rule on pollen that is not genetically modified. Okay? But the specific question in front of the court is, how do we deal with pollen that is genetically modified? So if you take the new proposed sentence of the Commission that pollen is a natural constituent of honey, and you apply that to the specific case, meaning GM pollen, then the sentence would read, GM pollen is a natural constituent of honey, which is completely contrary to the whole GMO legislation in the EU, because the whole regulatory scheme is based on the premise that genetically modified material is not natural and requires a labeling. So we, as actually many beekeeping organizations in Europe, have published position papers on this ruling. The reason why it is not in effect yet is because as European beekeeping organizations together, we managed to stop it in Parliament. And what is interesting about these position papers, and if you contact me afterwards, I can point you to these position papers and provide them to you, because there's a lot more to say about this than what I just said. What is interesting is that one of the strongest positions against this proposal is from the beekeepers that the proposal is supposed to help, which are the Spanish beekeepers, which are pretty much the only one within the EU that have to deal with significant cultivation of GM crops. They have about more than 100,000 hectares of genetically modified corn to deal with. And even the beekeepers that are most affected in Europe reject the proposal by the Commission, but there are certainly, maybe from outside of Europe, different views on whether there's on this. From the industry side, as you can see by the presentation that Gudrun did, okay. The Commission claims that this would help also the importers, but about unauthorized events. If you are in a country where you're not sure what's being cultivated, you're still in the exact same situation. So one of the reasons the whole thing is stuck in Parliament, a lot of the claims that the Commission made about their proposal, number one, that the change is so little that you don't even need an impact statement. Number two, they're only doing this to help the beekeepers, and it would help the honey importers. A lot of it, the members of the European Parliament across the spectrum found is probably not true. Okay, so maybe Norberto, you would like to. Did I reflect this correctly, or do you have a different view on it?
No, of course, yes. This is a paradox. So I don't know how you will solve it finally.
Okay, then we are very lucky that we have Wolfgang Köhler. You have to turn off your. You need to turn off your. We were very lucky to have Wolfgang Köhler with us, who's been trying to square the circle for the German government and also in the different European bodies. So maybe you can share your views to this question.
Thank you. I see a big problem with this project of the European Commission, because the Commission pretends that even with this proposal, the honey will be in the scope of the European GMO legislation, which is a very risky way, because if they reject the, let's say, theory of the court that pollen is an ingredient, so they must prove why honey will fall under this legislation, GMO legislation. You only come to this result if you presume that honey is produced from a GMO. And I think that's a very, very risky interpretation to say that honey is a product of a plant. And in my feeling, it could, if it comes into force, you are in a situation that any court of justice in one of the member states easily can just put the question, is this true that honey is produced from a plant? And I'm afraid that it will not take much time that this will happen. And in this case, and when we are there, then honey is out of the scope of the GMO legislation, and we are on a point where we started. So I'm afraid this solution of the European Commission it will not help nobody. And it's very interesting that we have a statement of the law service juridique. The legal service of the parliament rejecting it because it says, they say it is contradicts the sentence of the court. We will see what will happen, but anyway, this proposal is not at all a solution for the problem that we have.
Maybe to round this out, actually in Europe, every branch of this system has their own legal service to advise them. So on this question, you have to have the Commission proposing it, but the Parliament and Member States, and they also have their input, and they have their own legal services. And the only legal service that thinks this will work and is okay is the legal service of the Commission itself. The Parliament's legal service, and completely independent from that, the legal service of the Member States, okay, thinks it's wrong, okay? Now, what was mentioned earlier already in presentations, the court verdict is constantly characterized as some judges that didn't know what was going on in beekeeping, thinking that beekeepers put pollen in the honey, okay? Actually, this is not what they did, okay? What they said was, we have a legal framework for GMOs in Europe, where a lot of the questions are tied to the word ingredient, okay? So what we're saying, for the purposes of GMO legislation, not for anything else, not for general food labeling, for the purposes of GMO legislation, to close a loophole, we're saying you have to treat it like an ingredient, whether the beekeeper put it in there or not, okay? This is very different. You had similar situations in European law. For example, when an American inventor came up with the Segway scooter, which is this funny thing you've probably seen with two wheels on the side and which is electronically balances you around, okay? Now, what kind of vehicle is this, okay? No legal text in Europe was talking about this. So for example, what the Austrian government did was, for the purposes of traffic laws, this is a bicycle, okay? Everybody knew this is not a bicycle, but for the purposes of traffic law, and therefore it was clear it had to use the bicycle lanes, it didn't need an insurance plate like a moped, you know? And so this is going on all the time. There's another example in GMO law. In GMO law, you have the term animal product. This was mentioned earlier. In European regulations, you don't have to label milk, eggs, and meat, even though the animal feed came from a GMO plant. And this category is called animal product. And when they created this text, they referred to an existing term, animal product, that exists in the general purpose labeling laws. So normally, actually, in general food labeling, honey is considered an animal product, not a plant product, okay? But because in honey you can find the DNA, okay? It's the argument for excluding milk, eggs, and meat does not work for honey. So you have the same word with a different meaning in general food labeling and in GMO labeling. So the problem that the Commission is trying to solve of a court ruling of incompetent judges actually doesn't exist. And what is especially appalling about this is all of the arguments that they're making now for their proposal, they actually made in front of the court. They were a party of the court case. The court knew about all of these arguments because the Commission made them, and the court specifically rejected them. Now the Commission has a proposal on the table to try to circumvent this court ruling, and luckily members of parliament are understanding what's wrong with this. We as beekeepers have made proposals how to treat honey correctly. So if you want to make a change, there are changes that you could make to deal with some of the issues that were raised with the analysis. You know that you can have a single pollen grain of an underrepresented species causing the value to be 100%. Okay, there are ways around this that are adequate for our product, just like we have adequate rules for labeling monofloral honeys. Okay, so I hope we've exhaustively answered your question, and there's somebody that has a question here.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to thank the speakers today. Very interesting.
It's on, but you need to speak.
Okay. Hello.
Okay, much better.
So I would like to thank the speakers today. Very interesting topics. I regret that Fanny is not in the room. And I would like to I think that the rest of the speakers, apart from Mr. Garcia, are in a form of agreement, or sort of, that GMO on a large scale is not very beneficial for beekeeping, not only from economic perspective, but otherwise for pollinators and ecological and other perspectives. So if I may engage you in a little bit of a discussion, because I think some of the points that you made, although very eloquent, I don't think they were correct. First of all, when you were saying that you want to have a look at the whole picture, I think that your presentation was mainly from the point of view of Argentine being able to market the products. So you don't have the whole picture, and I don't think it's, you're saying that you adopted GMO in a smart way, but I would question that this is really so, because as you say, it caused a total change in beekeeping practices, and I would bet that it caused many other changes adopting GMO on such a large scale in industrial agriculture. So on the point of labeling, I regret to say that I think I heard some of the scare tactics that were used in the debate in California, in the US in general, because you're saying that we have gone too far with this, but actually you have to account for the fact that this labeling debate is a result of the GMO proliferation going too far, and the pesticide use that is related to it going too far. So it's a result, actually. It's not something that the labeling is not of itself. It didn't come by just out of the blue. So you're saying that if we haven't solved the problem completely, then there is no point in doing anything in labeling. So I would argue that it's actually okay to have 3 types of labels, 3 types of jars, even though the last one says we don't know about this honey. Because labeling is all about giving the right to the consumers to choose, putting this knowledge in their hands so they can make the decision. So if you want to go all the way down to this, then I think it's okay. Okay, so I think it's okay to have a jar that says we don't know if this is safe, if this has GMO or no. And they will be able to make their decision based on price, based on their beliefs and whatnot. So if you have some comments on this, I'll really appreciate it.
Okay, Norberto, you probably want to answer.
Yes, thank you very much. Your opinion. I'm glad that it is recognized that a third label is necessary. And that is the point. The issue of GMOs is not an issue of a declaration. You may find serious people and not so serious people around the world. So it's not a fact of declaration, it is a fact of testing. And by now, testing has certain limitations that must be informed. The day testing can reach those cases that cannot be reached now, well, we'll all be very glad. I agree with you about the right of the consumer. I just brought our point of view. I cannot bring your point of view. This is just my point of view. I'm very glad to share with you different points of views. From our point of view, we must try to adapt. For example, the US market has very, very different but high standards of specifications. California, for example, has a law with specific specifications for honey, and we have to try to adapt to all those specifications too. But in the case of GMOs in the US, it's more simple because
there is no labeling.
About labeling?
There is no labeling, that's why it's more simple.
No, but in California, the consumers are asking for more labeling. What I'm trying to say is that in the case of GMOs issue, it's easier for the US because a great part of the honey is bought in South America. And in South America, you may find mainly authorized events. So if you find, you can say yes or no. Because this of testing about GMOs is like hunting inside the zoo. But what happens outside the zoo? Well, that's the third label. The US had a very strong political decision 3 years ago, and that makes the whole scenario more clear. I think in the European case, the whole scenario must be considered, and at the end, I don't know what the Parliament will say. At the end, when we have the final decision, well, we must try to continue to adapt. In our case, we cannot declare hectare by hectare. It would not be serious. What we can do is to declare regions plus testing.
Yeah.
We can. That is our road. But for other countries, the way may be different, but with the same goal, with the same, rather same result, but a serious way. That's the only emphasis. Thank you very much for your opinion.
Thank you. Yeah.
Can you press your button? Your microphone button? Well, actually, to your question, I don't think...
One thing?
Yeah, okay, sure.
Sure. My apologies, but I have a meeting. I had a meeting at 12:30, so I must leave this very interesting round table. But please, my apologies.
Okay. Thank you very much. I may want to leave you with a comment. I actually don't think the disagreement is anywhere near as large. I think in a lot of areas we have quite a common understanding as far as the third category goes. Okay. There's a common example for that. Just because police cannot stop all crime, you don't get rid of the police. Okay, so we do as much as we can, and you can be sure of one thing. If one of these rare events has large-scale adoption, the labs will develop the technology to pick it up. Okay? So it is true that you have a gray area where we don't, where we might not pick up certain events. But if these events have large-scale adoption in agriculture, you'll be sure the lab side will catch up with that. Is that correct?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So with that in mind, we're all this unknown is unknown, but the size of it we can have an idea of, and so it's not very significant. Do we have more questions from the
May
audience?
I only add one more thing from the perspective of a small beekeeper regarding, because I am pro labeling, but there is a lot of degree of difficulty with this, because if you put GMO labeling just like that on producers of honey, I'm from Bulgaria, for example, and this I think pushes beekeeping into a totally different, because as you said, if you have 100 kilograms of kilo produced, then you will not be able to afford the testing, or it will be, so this has to be addressed in some way.
Yep. This is a very valid point, and so, for example, I come from Germany. Thanks to people diligently working and taking the responsibility in government, we are within a system where we have a government register, and combined with the fact that none of the farmers want to grow this stuff. Actually, when the industry wanted to get this into production, they had to somehow convince politicians to conduct government field trials because the farmers didn't want to use it. So the combination of having a register and no incentive or inclination by the farmers to adopt.
So why test it if it's not there in the first place?
And the German government specifically states, and even for the positive labeling, the rules state, and the retail chain accepts this. If I'm shipping honey to the supermarket and I provide a certificate of origin, and this is what we provide to all of our members, where I declare, okay, this honey is from a region certified by the government register to be GMO free. To the retail chains right now, even though it's a different statement, okay, it's as good as a honey analysis, okay?
Yeah.
They accept this. So I was involved in the drafting of the positive label rules, and I specifically asked for something that says, if somebody in another country has an equivalent system, not the same, for example, Argentina with a regional system, okay, then this should be permissible for the positive labeling, so that essentially a beekeeper in another country has the same chance to be in German supermarket shelves with a positive labeling as we have, provided you have, Wolfgang has it here in German, provided, and I made this available, for example, to Norberto, okay, provided that the government provides the necessary monitoring, so we even for the German rules, we try to be not exclusive, saying, okay, this is a great way to keep out competitors, but in fact, give the beekeeping community in the other countries, I can provide you with a document. You can go to your ministry and say, if you do your homework, I can ship even positive labeled honey to the German market. Does that answer your question?
Yes, but unfortunately, Southeast.
Thank you. But I'm sorry, I don't want this to be a dialogue, because dialogues we can have easily on site. If there are others waiting to ask questions, then they should have a chance before we run out of time, which is in 6 minutes. Okay, is that okay with you?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that unfortunately Southeastern Europe does not have what you have in Germany yet. So
but there's an incentive at least.
Yes,
I would
absolutely.
like to raise a question. This is good and bad. She's not on the panel, but even though, how likely it is? You said you can just analyze what you know, what's possible, that what you know. You cannot analyze what you don't know. You, in your analysis, you screen on the promoters. Is it possible? Could it be possible? Because also what the Garcia said and so on, what the discussion was before, most of the scientific world is rather open, but there is a big area which is accidentally is also the biggest honey exporter in the world. That they have not so open circle in scientific work, and maybe they developed promoters you don't find. How likely it is that this is a lack of knowledge, and it's possible to import honey which doesn't fulfill the requirements, but you cannot find it.
Yes, as I mentioned, detecting these events specifically, you can only do it if you have a system like we have in Europe. Like you have a registration, you have to go for the authorization, which includes that the company applying for this authorization must publish also the methodology. Yeah? So only if this is known, you can test for it up to now. And of course, it's very likely, I think so, that the countries which have not this system do something with GMO, yeah. Yeah. And if we cannot, now we cannot test it maybe, this is also the risk, yeah, that now you import a honey from this country, you cannot detect it, yeah, but maybe in half a year, somebody is able, because they do also research on that, and after half a year or after a year, they are able to detect it, yeah, and it's already in your glass, yeah, you have tested it and didn't find it, but after a year, it's on the shelf, somebody makes a research and can find it, so this is a big risk. It's better to have a register, it's better to know what's inside, to protect the market also, yeah? And I think what you said, my personal opinion was, it was the first reaction also when the court of, when this decision was made, that some people publicly said, okay, then we import honey from those countries again, which we cannot detect, we know we cannot detect it, but this is not the way, I think, to solve it.
Maybe a minor point in this, because for a lot of the tools are being used, that are being used are, at least for many events, common, okay? For example, if you find the promoter and the terminator, okay? You, with exception of the virus positive, okay? You can say, okay, I've got something here, okay? And even though it might be somebody's lab experiment, you know? Actually, in the US, there is now a scene, because the bio industry has done so much promotion of how great GMOs are and promoted in schools, that are hackers that are creating genetically modified events in their kitchen with equipment that they buy on eBay. Okay, but not all of the tools all the time, but you can have the situation where you know you've got a GMO event, but you don't know where it came from and where it's authorized. And I think over time, as I said, with large-scale adoption, from a consumer's point of view, yes, there are a few outliers, but if you know there's large-scale adoption, the labs will catch up quickly. For China, it's very important. It's not just the labs and the food industry that are monitoring what China is doing, it's also NGOs. And I personally know somebody that traveled to China to analyze the poplar trees, because there is a reforestation program going on in China with genetically modified poplar trees. Okay? And you know, so from those investigations, we also know what the event is.
Maybe I might add something. We have already now, we have events which cannot be covered by the screening, so we have to go directly to the events, and this might increase, yeah? So you have to know directly the event you use. And also I think, luckily for the beekeeping sector, most of the authorized GM plants are not so attractive for the bees. Yeah? But if you look on the literature, there are research done on eucalyptus, for example, and eucalyptus is worldwide also a huge source of honey. Yeah? And imagine that, I mean, there's a whole another problem for Argentina.
Right. This is actually an issue that we raised already 10 years ago. Genetically modified products that are not designed to be food or even feed, but genetically modified poplar trees. But we have a question from somebody that is probably even better at giving answers to questions because he is an expert.
Well, thank you. My name is Robert Rosinger from Bayer, Germany. While I'm not an expert in GMO or in honey, I'm an analytical expert. And I can tell you that labs are actually catching up. There are new techniques coming up which will allow study of other alteration. I'm not sure if we can tell something about GMO-contamination. It's also possible with new technologies that you say something has a sample that has been analyzed in the past. Has it been contaminated with some stuff? So new things are approaching. One of the basic problems that I see here, we can analyze more and more, our methods get more sensitive, and in the end we add only more confusion to those people who are buying the honey, the customers. So I think it is really important also to educate the customer. If you have a third label, well, of course that gives another choice to the customer, but it also creates confusion. And be very careful, in my opinion, that this doesn't backfire. So if you bring up additional labels, if you bring up a new system like traffic light system, green, orange, red, educate the people who you are selling those labels to. And I think the other extremely important thing that I see here is we have to educate the lawyers. Because if those people don't understand how natural science works, there's no point in continuing any discussion. It's interesting to follow that people say the pollen is not the GMO, actually the pollen contains the genetically modified DNA and passes it on. So where's the point now saying this is no GMO? This is just wording. This is just wording, but it is far away from the reality. So educate the lawyers, talk to them, and this is the way we have to proceed.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Just thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to avoid confusion. I don't think anybody here was proposing a third label, okay? The point was more implicitly, okay? You can have unlabeled products that in fact contain something. And in the honey sector, we are no strangers to labels that don't tell the customer very much, like honey from EU and non-EU countries, which tell the customer exactly that the honey is not from Mars. Okay, Anne, I think we'll have the last question because we're running out of time.
It's not a question, it's more the point of view of French beekeepers. I work for French beekeepers, and for us this issue is really important, this labeling of GMOs. And why is it important? It's because this labeling of honey will allow us to get coexistence rules that will protect our hives. How a corn grower, a conventional corn grower, or an organic corn grower can be protected from GM corn. It's because there are distances, and why are there distances? It's because there is a labeling if the corn is contaminated. If we have no labeling, we reduce our chances to get a good protection rules of our hives. And for French beekeepers, they don't want at all their hives to be, their hive products to be contaminated with GMOs, and they don't want their bees to be in contact with GMOs because, as said Fanny and Gina from Greek, there are no real studies on the effects of GMOs on bees. That's why they are really worried, and I know that the situation is not the same in the Occidental Europe than in Eastern Europe. And I think we should really work together with Eastern beekeepers, Eastern Europe beekeepers, to share our experiments on that.
Thank you very much. And for those of you who are not from the European community and don't know the intricacies of our system, in the very beginning we talked about that, Wolfgang Köhler talked about that there is, in the European law or GMO legislation is based on 3 core principles. One is freedom of choice for the consumer, enabled through labeling. Okay? Number 2 is coexistence. You know, the consumer will not have freedom of choice if the producers don't have the choice of producing GMO-free. And for coexistence, the member states for each event have to come up with coexistence rules. For example, safety distances between farmers. And the third one is zero tolerance. No events that haven't been authorized in the EU can be placed on the market. Those are the 3 pillars the whole thing rests on. And in the case of honey, almost immediately after making these 3 promises to the European consumers, before that we had a moratorium in the EU, the Commission tried to figure out how to weasel out of this for honey. You know, no freedom of choice for the consumer. They pretended that, or many people pretended that there was no labeling, even though there were no rules for that. No coexistence rules for beekeepers, and even non-authorized materials flowed in through export. They completely reneged on, without changing any law, okay? They just performed some theater, having everybody think that these laws don't apply to honey. And the main reason is what Anne just stated. At the very beginning, when they made these promises, they realized that if they apply this to honey, the coexistence distances around beehives wouldn't be meters. I mean, we had fights in Europe where the distance between cornfields should be 10 meters, okay? Or 800 meters. Those were huge battles. They realized you're not talking meters when you're talking beekeeping. So if you want to understand all the back and forth and all the legal shenanigans, they are all dancing around the core questions. Are the promises to the consumers and the producers being kept? Okay? Which means a lot less surface area remaining for GMO cultivation? Or do we somehow sweep the beekeepers under the carpet so that GMO adoption can happen unchecked? That is actually the core of the whole dance. Did I characterize this correctly? Okay, 10 years of this. And maybe you will accept this as concluding remarks to this round table. Thank you very much for your interest. I'm available You can find me in the program if you have more questions. I think there will be some follow-up on that. Also this afternoon, and I think tomorrow, I don't know my own calendar, but if you look for Walter Hefeker, I have two more detailed presentations on different aspects of this if you're more interested in the subject. Thank you very much.